Well, I plan tonight to mostly clarify what Mr. Snyder was talking about when he was saying Orwellian. What do I mean by clarifying that? Oh, good. Thanks, Nicole. You've already got it up and everything. Mainly to discuss what's being collected on our kids, how it's being used, and where it's going. Next slide, please. Until just a few years ago, as Mr. Snyder alluded to, data was kept, any kind of school records or whatnot were pretty much, and actually Dr. Milgram mentioned it too, pretty much kept at the local school level or at the state level. If it was personally identifiable, it didn't go any farther than that. And there were very, very strong regulations in place to keep the purposes for any access to that data very, very narrow. But since the last few years, the Federal Department of Education has made a couple of really strong inroads into turning that on its head. The first is this one right here. The same race to the top competition that brought forced states to adopt the Common Core sight unseen also required states to create longitudinal databases. Longitudinal simply means over time. So literally collecting information from cradle to through career. They use that term a lot. And to format it in such a way that it's going to be able to be used nationwide. So now the data is going to be available everywhere. The second prong, and that's the next slide, is reinterpreting FERPA itself, the Federal Education Rights Privacy Act, that for 40 years, again, kept that purpose by which data could be accessed very, very narrow, has now been redefined so widely and so broadly that anyone who wants to use personally identifiable information in an accessory manner can do so with the blessings of the DOE. And furthermore, you as a parent are not going to be notified of that, let alone be able to give your permission, because that's been changed to a best practice as opposed to what used to be absolutely necessary. Next slide. Okay. So what exactly is being collected? These are not your father's school records anymore. This is not just your test scores and your grades and whatever. There's quite a bit more information being collected. And if you go onto the SEDS website, the Common Education Data Standards, you can see for yourself exactly what version they're on, which is version 4, that has over 400 points of data that are supposed to be collected on your kid. But it gets better because there's a more extended version that has 1,349 points of data being collected on your kid, including the list I developed there. And you're looking at this list and thinking, well, some of this stuff is already protected, like my health records through HIPAA and some of this other stuff. Again, go onto the Department of Education website, and they have a white paper that specifically says, no, HIPAA doesn't apply here. We're not a health institution, so we can keep this data and we can do whatever we want with it. And, they put it in good terms, but that's what it basically says. And you're thinking, well, what about, at least maybe for these disciplinary records, at least your police records and so forth are sealed at the age of 18, so you get a fresh start and whatnot. But again, not in this case. They will remain on your permanent record and available to whomever the DOE says can have it. And I should mention that the two major industries that paid for the development of the Common Core were high-tech industries and insurance industries. Think about that for a minute. And of course, commercial interests all over the place. They're going to be selling you all kinds of products, but the IRS intends to use some of this data, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Labor, and lots and lots and lots of private corporations intend to be able to use this data, including your future employers and all of that. So, there's some issues here. And finally, you're probably looking at the last bullet point there, psychometrics, and you're mouthing that. What are psychometrics? Next slide. It's nothing more or less than an entire psych profile on your kid. So this is Merriam-Webster's definition. I thought it was as good as anything. And the idea is to get all of your child's beliefs, attitudes, values, personality, basically recorded for personal use or for their uses. And you're thinking, well, what are their uses? Is it just to be able to take that data and personalize their education experience? Sure, it might be, but there is something a little bit more sinister. Next slide. This is a report. In tech data collection. You're thinking, well, as long as how is that stuff being recorded in the classroom? Well, this information, the Common Core is extremely tech-driven. Everything is going online, including even the passages your kids are supposed to be reading. And the reason for that is you can tag this information and literally keep track of what your children are interested your children specifically, how long it took them to answer things, ask them personal questions along the way. And of course, these are not sheets that are coming home, so you don't know that along the way, with all of this computer stuff, they were asked about their sexuality, they were asked about their honesty for different things. My kid last year, she was doing something called iReady. Any of you recognize that? I see a few heads. And right in the middle of a particular lesson that was otherwise pretty good, it came to a screeching halt and asked her about online music piracy. And what did she think about that? And she had to answer what she felt, one way or the other, in order to go on to the lesson. So you're getting a lot of this, and they're just continuing to collect it. But, like I said, there's a little more sinister idea, and that's the next slide, sorry. This is a report that the Department of Education came out with, and I understand this was the draft. I understand there is now a final, and it's talking about basically molding kids to have the personality that they feel is important. I looked up the 5 people who wrote this thing. None of them have any background in psychology that I could find. No child development experts here, but they determined that grit, tenacity, and perseverance are the things that we should have all children manifest in their personalities. Now, I got to tell you, I know 3 people with grit, tenacity, and perseverance, so really the Department of Education should, be careful what it wishes for. But regardless, in the process, you don't have to go very far in this 200-plus page monster before you realize some of the more sinister aspects of this. And next slide. Right there in the executive summary, pages 7 and 8, it talks about if your kid happens to have picked up some kind of extraneous values out there from somewhere, that's okay. They can take care of that because it's teachable and malleable. And I added, or I bolded, beliefs, attitudes, dispositions, and values. So don't worry, they can fix that stuff. Whatever they've picked up elsewhere, they can take care of that for you. And they talk a lot about the data collection, how important it is to collect every single thing about your kid's personality. Next slide. Right down to the point of page 44, the devices that they're going to connect to, that they really want to connect to children in order to get their physiological response to different stimuli. I can't make this stuff up. How much they sweat, what their pulse rate is, where their eyeballs are, where their facial expressions, even like brainwave patterns and so forth. It's really weird. And of course, if the child is not picking this up fast enough, they want to do something called intervention. And these interventions can be up to 10 hours long. We would call it re-education, but the new word now is intervention. And so they go over and over and over about all these different intervention strategies in order to bring about the personality traits they feel are very, very important. Next slide. Here's another program, the Desired Results Development Program, that's being used in California right now for certain children between ages 0 to 12 in various federal programs and so forth. And you can see the various desired developmental results that they want, yet more personality traits. And I submit to you that I don't know if there's any single archetype that's going to make guarantee a successful adult, and that there really is just sort of one, total package there. It really does take all kinds to make a world. And I'm looking at this first one about the socially competent thing. And sure, if you're going to be president, it's probably really good to be able to do that, to have those qualities, kiss those babies, shake those hands. But if you're, as far as I know, no head of state has ever been in the forefront of cancer research as well. Those people are fetuses with shoes, right? Sorry, as Dana Carvey would put it, they're not as socially adept necessarily, and yet they're very successful. Do we want to tell these people, oh, you're a loser, you're not, doing what we feel, you should be doing in terms of your personality, and just drag them down? I find this very, very damaging, what we would be telling children who do not follow the exact round hole we want to put them in. Next slide, please. But wait, there's more. So, I mean, there's the whole idea of molding a child, but then there's the whole data mining aspect. Mining involves taking reams of data, sometimes whole, aggregate data and all of this, and being able to make predictive models for it. Now, you're seeing that last bullet point there. I'm not even going to go Minority Report tonight. What I am going to talk about are two other aspects of this data mining. The first being the ability, the stated ability to be able to predict where people are going to be successful. By looking at all of this data, by being able to crunch it, by being able to compare it with other outcomes, we will be able to predict where you're best going to be successful and therefore pick your career for you. And Arne Duncan, the Secretary of Education, next slide, is literally on record. That's what he looks like. I just wanted to show you a picture of him. Is literally on record as being able to say, all right, by the age of 7, I want to be able to look at a child and say, you're on target to go to college or not. And be able to separate the college kids from the non-college kids and track, put them in their tracks and, put them in their places by the age of 7. But again, I kind of know a few things about data and whatnot. And the thing with this data is it's nothing more than a historical record. It cannot measure capacity. It simply tells you how they did on something, but not whether they could have done better or whatever else. So, for example, let's say the non-college side, somebody on that side suddenly gets inspired by either a tragic event or even a really, really good event and says, that's me. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to be the one who does this. And do we want to tell those kids, oh, no, sorry, you're pumping gas, And you think maybe that's dramatic, but if you talk about to some of the most passionate, tireless, indefatigable and productive people in some field, they all have stories like that. Well, my brother died and I vowed I was going to cure this disease. Or I flew a plane for the first time when I was X years old and I decided that was going to be my career forever. And nothing in our predictive models or our algorithms or our science or whatnot can work with that. But what it does do is stifle innovation. It does cull people's choices for them, and it basically destroys their freedoms. And yet there's one more aspect to this data mining that's a real problem. Next slide. This is David Coleman, what he looks like. He's the chief architect for the entire Common Core. And he went to a conference called Datapalooza at the White House in 2012. And he gave this, I think it was the keynote speech. And in that speech, he said, this data that we're collecting is fantastic. We're going to know where everybody is. We're going to really be able to understand everybody and mobilize people and whatnot. And we're never going to lose an election again. Yeah, what does that mean? He thinks that by knowing enough about people and being able to craft your message and manipulate you and so forth, that he'll be able to drive you where he wants you to go, be able to herd you better. And anyway, you probably started listening to this talk thinking, well, what's the big deal? I don't have anything to hide. But you do. You have a free republic to protect. And so I cannot stress enough, Mr. Snyder's forms are bulletproof. He went through the entire California Education Code. Man, his reward is in heaven. And picked out exactly where the California Education Code says you may not do this. This is actually illegal. And they even promise pro bono to defend you if you run into legal problems. I have successfully used these forms this is my 2nd year now, and have had absolutely no issues with them. Any opposition just evaporates as soon as my kids hold up their forms. And like I said, I can't stress enough, use them. And if you can't get any forms tonight because we run out or something, pji.org has all of them available. Thank you.